Thank you, Rob. I'll call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order today, September 12th here. Is there any declaration of interest related to any item on this agenda? Seeing none, of course, you can declare it at any time. Is there any business arising from former minutes? Not seeing any. We have two delegations this morning. The first, I'm happy to announce, is Bella Satara Singh Soros. She was a page at the Queen's Park Legislature earlier this year, and she's here to give us a little bit of a flavor of how that went. I'm also happy to say she's a resident of Southgate, which is, I'm not biased, but I am. So come on forward, Bella, and I presume someone showed you how to turn that microphone on. I'm sure you probably already know how to do that from your days as a page. So the floor is yours, Bella. Welcome.
There we go. Okay, thank you so much. Good morning, Grey County Council. My name is Bella Satara Singh Soros, and I am very, very honored to be invited here to speak to you about my page experience at Queen's Park. Before we start, I would like to give my special thanks to you, Grey County Warden and Council, residents, guests, and staff here for allowing me to speak here today. I would also like to bring to your attention those little red words there, which will mean something significant later on. So a little bit about me. My first name is Bella Satara. I'm 14 years old and a grade 9 student. I'm very proud of my academic achievements and awards, such as being in the honor roll both in grade 7 and 8, winning the English and Music Award. I am a youth empowerment speaker, singer, writer. I've been speaking at public speaking contests, and I've been elected to student council and head council in grade 8. I'm also a community volunteer, and I would like to introduce my little brother Riker, father Joey Soros, and as you know, my mother Monica Singh Soros, who have come here to support me today. My aspiration in the future is to become a lawyer. I just like to throw that in. So the annual participation is approximately 150 young students selected each year from across Ontario, when actually in reality, there's a lot more people who apply every single year, and there's a very slim selection, which I'm very fortunate to have been in that experience. As well, we had experienced the provincial and legislature in action. Primarily, the question period was very, very dramatic, but also very interesting. The ideal candidates for being a page are outgoing, high-achieving, and community-involved individuals. And we had to demonstrate responsibility and leadership, especially being so punctual all the time. I met many key and parliamentary political figures, such as Doug Ford, as you see there. I learned firsthand about Ontario's parliament and the legislative process, and we were directed by the Page Program Coordinator, who we will learn about later on. Pages also receive an honorarium during our term of duty. And the most important part, I believe, about the Page program that really pushed me forward even till now was the fact that I forged lifelong friendships with peers from across the province. And I mean from Niagara to Ottawa to where I am now. I truly appreciate them and how they've been with me this whole time. As well, the selection process is competitive, as I've said, involving an application. For myself, I had to apply twice, and in grade 8, I got accepted. And applicants need strong academic records, keen interest in politics, and recommendations from teachers. So a day in the life. Our day started at early with a briefing at session at 8 to 8:30 a.m. And over there you see 4 a.m., 7:30 a.m., and 8 a.m. Wake up, walk in, and assemble. At 4 a.m. every day, I would wake up, put my uniform on, go to the GO train, then to the subway, then walk all the way to Queen's Park, getting there by 7:30, putting on my suit, and then finally going into the room, closing the door, and assembling for the day onward. We were on our feet delivering messages and documents throughout the entire day. We had learning sessions about Ontario's legislative process daily, preparing us for debates, bills, and tests, of which I got the highest score. There were 21 pages, not including myself, 124 MPPs, and 7 kilometers walked by pages daily. I can truly say I got my steps in. So the highlights of my experience, Honorable MPP Rick Byers, Bruce Gray Owen Sound. He is a wonderful, wonderful MPP. He has a sound mind and a great heart, and I look up to him. As well, Honorable MPP Patrice Barnes from Ajax, Honorable MPP Vijay Thanagustlam from Scarborough Rouge, Honorable MPP Pramit Singh Sarkaria, Brampton South, and Honorable Lieutenant Governor Edith Dumont, who is the most humble person I have met. And of course, Honorable Premier Doug Ford, who is honestly very humble and down to earth. Another highlight is the page uniform is modeled after the British parliamentary tradition. And a special moment is that my dad fixed my tie midway, which created some sort of cinematographic sort of thing. But I really appreciated it, and it showed a lot of family, even within the page program. The first day of orientation was very exciting. Though I wasn't super prepared, I hadn't had my uniform, and I wasn't like so focused at that time. As times went on, our page coordinator helped me through, and I became valedictorian. And the camera dining room at the Quorum Cafe had amazing food. I thought Gordon Ramsay was cooking at that time. So as I said, I was a valedictorian elected by my fellow peers. It was an incredibly special moment during a time at Queen's Park, and we had recognition of our leadership and achievements. Together, we celebrated this honor with fellow pages and program coordinators, and I am still motivated to continue pursuing leadership and community involvement. I couldn't have done it with all the people helping me there and my dear friend who was the valedictorian alongside me. Now, the coordinators, Mr. G and Mr. E, are dedicated coordinators, taught us about the legislative process, provided counsel and support, and acted as our family away from home. I would like to give my special thanks to Mr. G. If you ever come to watch this, you taught me how to be a teacher, a leader, and a comedian because you were so hilarious. I also miss Paula Carrero. She preferred to stay behind the scenes, so I do not have a photo of me with her, which is extremely caring and supportive. For example, she made me tea when I was coughing quite a bit, ensured that we kept up with our responsibilities, and disciplined and helped us rise to the occasion of being a page. Now, some personal anecdotes, such as pay your fines, soda switcheroo, and thank you, but no. So paying your fines, we had fines in the page program where if you had unparliamentary language, that was $1. If you were late, that's another $1. And here on my lanyard, we have an ID badge. If you lose this, $5. The amount at the end of the third week was $34, in which we donated to charity. Now, the soda switcheroo was when MPP Michael DeBolo, who is known for this, I had a glass in my hand on the first day when I was at the water station. He walked in, said, "Can I use this glass?" And I said, "Sure." Pulled out a bubbly and poured it in the glass. And for reference, you're only supposed to have water within the chamber. And he said they'll never notice. He picked it up and he walked in. And then lastly, thank you, but no. There was some romantic conflict trying to happen between me and another person, but I said we must stay focused on our page lead duties and my future. Oh, there we go. So what I learned, I gained a comprehensive knowledge of how our provincial legislature functions, such as making bills, how things pass through from the top to the bottom, and I learned the importance of civic engagement and participating in the democratic processes. I learned a whole thing about democracy and why it's so important. I improved public speaking abilities through interactions and presentations, which I do hope is evident today. I developed stronger leadership skills by taking on responsibilities and initiatives, and I learned the significance of maintaining neutrality and impartiality in a legislative environment. I appreciated the importance and fairness of objectivity in public service. Yes, we were ordered to maintain nonpartisan no matter what. Despite our political views, we have to push them aside and serve each MPP equally. My future aspirations, this experience has inspired me to pursue a career in public service and law. I've always loved law since grade 6 till grade 9, and I've always looked forward to helping people in any way I can. And I think public service is a great way to do that, as I see you all helping others as well. I'm motivated to make a positive impact through public service, and I'm dedicated to staying engaged in my community. As well, I'm eager to continue learning about our government and its processes. Now, back to those red words, mysterious, audi alterum partem. It's Latin for listen to the other side. This was our motto in the page program, which also was known as let the other side be heard as well. No person should be judged without a fair hearing, and ensures each party has opportunity to respond to the evidence against them, which I do believe some MPPs have to relook again as they keep heckling at each other. Again, it upholds justice and impartiality and is essential for fair and equitable decision making. Thank you so much for Grey County for inviting me to speak today. I hope my presentation has given you insight into the incredible page program at Queen's Park. Any questions, I am welcome to receive.
Thank you, Bella Cetera. I truly appreciate your coming today, attending and sharing your story with us. It's very interesting. My own brother, younger brother, was a page many years ago, so I know it's a great program. So, and congratulations for getting to that. Are there any questions from council? Councilor McQueen.
Mr. Warden, and congratulations on the successful part of being a page. Will you be doing this presentation to your schoolmates?
There we go. I do hope so in the future I'll be able to present this to them. I've already shown a few people, but maybe in the future I'll totally do this presentation in front of them.
Are there any other questions? Councilor Mattress.
Thank you. Through the warden, thank you very much for sharing with us. And how are you moving forward in inspiring other young people to be able to pursue the same kind of opportunity that you had?
Well, I do my best through community involvement, and I hope as I walk with my mother and meet more people, I hope to get through and speak to more kids, speak to more adults even, because everyone could use a little bit of encouragement, and speak to my classmates, of course, because they have many opportunities and I believe they are more than capable of doing it.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Bella Cetera. And the only advice that I could give you, and just remember, advice is worth the square root of what you pay for it. Rethink the lawyer thing. Really. Just saying. Anyway, thank you so much. Take care. This morning we have a second delegation, and we have Shannon McGavin is here. She's the CEO and founder of the Well Community Collective, and she's joining us today to speak about youth and wellness. Shannon, welcome. And the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good morning, Warden, CEO, councilors, Grey County staff. Thank you for hearing my delegation today. Much appreciated. I am Shannon McGavin, pronouns are she, her, and I am the CEO of the Well Community Collective. And as I said, I'm honored to be here. Today, I'm going to introduce you to the Well Community Collective. I'm also going to apologize for speaking very quickly. I have a lot to get through. So I'll be introducing you to the Well Community Collective. Overall, we are a collaboration of youth and youth serving organizations and community providers who are co-designing one-stop shops for youth wellness in Grey Bruce and here in Perth. I don't often share this slide with everyone, but for those of you who don't know me, this is my family. We are loving, we're kind, we're silly, and we love to have lots and lots of fun. What you don't know is that my daughter in the middle, who smiles the most and has the largest belly laughs, suffers with severe depression, and she had actually devised a plan to end her suffering. Thankfully, that plan never materialized, but our family obviously was changed forever. Today, our family has lots to smile about and be thankful for. However, that was only conceivable after we were able to muddle through service after service to find multiple layers of support that she needed. As I mentioned, this was painstakingly difficult for all of us, but I do want to acknowledge our privilege in this situation. As a vice principal, I am retired now. I knew who to call for support, and I understood the layers to navigate her care. I had a car to drive her to where she needed to go, and I had the resources to do so. Our daughter had a safe space, a warm bed, and access to healthy food to support her continued wellness. We also had resources to allow us to access pay-for-services supports. Unfortunately, this is not the same story for all youth and families across Grey County and Bruce and Huron and Perth. Right now, many families and youth struggle to access services. They are frustrated with the system that has let them down continuously, time after time, and they are in crisis. As I'm sure you're aware, since COVID, rates of anxiety, depression, and substance use have increased dramatically in our local communities. Grey Bruce specifically are tracking higher in substance use and suicide than Ontario, which has caused obviously great alarm in our communities. And that's why local youth serving providers are coming together with a collaborative solution. We've also included some additional stats in our notes. However, we often don't feel we have to remind folks that it is really 1 in 4 of youth who are struggling with mental health and substance use disorders. Due to this urgent need, we are coming together with a bold vision and plan of action to support youth with a one-stop shop for care. Our overall mission is to create that safe space where youth feel that they belong. A one-stop shop where youth find support, guidance, and empowerment to thrive in every aspect of their lives. Together with youth and our community partners, we're creating a network of hubs where youth can access mental health resources, counseling, recreation, education, housing, and employment services all under one roof. Currently, there are other hubs that are very similar to this in Palmerston. That's the closest one to here, and throughout Ontario, as this is a provincial model. And they've been designed with youth and families to provide that safe space for belonging. As I've mentioned, The Well is a collective of organizations united with that common goal to build that new standard of care for youth. To support our collaboration, we have an integrated governance team in Grey Bruce specifically. I apologize, the graphic is so tiny, and with the logos really tiny. I will share with you who sits at our Grey Bruce governance table. So we have our Youth Action Council. So we have youth at the table. We have our Family and Community Advisory Council, Keystone, Grey Bruce CMHA, Grey Bruce Public Health, Grey Bruce YMCA, Grey Bruce Child and Family Services, and the Grey Bruce Ontario Health Team. I was first introduced to this wraparound model of care for youth in 2019. I have studied it and I have visited similar centers in Australia. They're called Headspace, Boundary in BC. And since then, I've been working very hard to get this model back to Ontario and to support Grey Bruce here in Perth. Some significant touch points of our journey include, we've engaged over 150 different stakeholders over the last 2 years that would support this model. We started a Youth Action Council, so we have youth informing the model, and a Family and Community Advisory Table. We've had Jo Henderson from Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario. She is the executive director there, and they are sort of the brilliance behind the model and the evidence behind the model. We've developed our integrated governance tables, which I just showed. We've started our fundraising campaign. We've hired engagement leads, and we've finalized Keystone as our backbone in Grey Bruce. So that means funding from the province will flow in through Keystone, and then as the governance table meets, then we decide how it will sort of flow through to Grey Bruce. So that's a huge shout out to Keystone for agreeing to do that. We have received some funding from Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario for measurement-based care, but we are really hoping to get that seed funding, which is $650,000 from the province of Ontario to support this model in Grey Bruce. And we've started actually co-designing centers with youth. Okay, so as I've said, it's really important to reiterate that this is an evidence-based model. It was started by Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario and through CAMH, which is the Center for Addiction and Mental Health. It is evidence-based, and the data collected across Ontario helps to inform this model, so we know it works. These centers provide, like I said, that walk-in access to one-stop shop services. It's also been identified in a needs assessment survey from Grey Bruce providers as the model that will actually, support youth in our communities. So that's very encouraging. These one-stop shops are also a pan-Canadian and international movement to build effective youth serviced and integrated services for youth across the country. So they're in BC. There's multiple other ones starting across Canada right now, but we follow the Youth Wellness Hub model, which is the Ontario model. Right now in Ontario, there are 27, and the government will be announcing another 5 that they will be supporting soon, they tell me. Who knows what soon means, though. In terms of impact, it has been shown that both youth seeking care and communities see gains, and we see this. This is an intervention and prevention model, so it helps decrease the burden of care for other providers. We're helping to remove that first layer. Obviously we would support youth that came in crisis, but we are supporting other youth serving organizations, not competing with them. The hubs increase access to youth because this is like a walk-in model and they have access to everything. It creates safety, belonging, and connection. We also see youth stay in our communities better. when they feel valued, heard, and seen. When they feel that, they stay in the communities. And I know that's something every small community is experiencing right now. This model is also fully transferable. So if youth go away to university in Guelph or London or Toronto, there are other youth wellness hubs that in those communities that they can, go in and experience the very same sort of care. Also in the community, we see further community impact, decreased ER visits due to mental health, and decreased local and global economic burden. And that means the money we're spending on keeping our youth and our communities well. Decreased siloed healthcare systems. We know we've seen siloed healthcare, we've seen siloed childcare services. We need to start working together and bringing everyone together. This is also a very fiscally responsible model with an ROI, return on investment, of $9.61. So very financially responsible. And when you take into consideration all of the various healthcare costs associated with youth mental health and substance use, every single dollar invested into a youth wellness hub saves $4,473 per patient, per client, per youth. And that would be in hospitalizations, ER visits, specialized services, GP visits, etc. For our fundraising campaign, we have hired the former executive director from the Grove Youth Wellness Hubs, who started 7 hubs and raised $14 million for Guelph Wellington. So that was a pretty strategic move on my part, and we are very thankful to have her joining our team. But we are even more happy to announce and excited to announce that we've also have John Peevers from Bruce Power and Bill Walker, retired MPP, who are our co-leads for our fundraising campaign that will kick off later on this month. So super excited. They were hoping to be here today, but both of them are extremely busy men, obviously. Together, we are embarking on a $6 million campaign with 70% going to programming, 30% going to capital, and that would open 4 hubs with 3 years of sustainability funding. There's no way we're going to do this without making sure that we can keep these open. This model, like I said, is also supported by the provincial government. However, it is a reverse funding model, which much to my dismay, obviously, but that means we almost have to be up and running and show that we can prove this, that there is the need, which we all know the need is there, but that we can actually collaborate and provide those services on the ground before they will actually look at funding us. So that's where we are right now. And I think to continue our years of collaborative research and the on the ground work that we're hoping to continue working with Grey County to support youth and families who are struggling to receive that walk-in care that they need. So some of the possible opportunities for support could include a letter of support. That letter of support we would want to include in our RFP to the province. We know that in the past this has been really helpful. I've met with Minister Thompson several times, MPP buyers, to get their support as well, because that's critical in this role. Sometimes I wish Minister Thompson would, elbow Ms. Mulrooney out of the way and talk to Tabolo, because she's only 2 down from him, to articulate the great need. But she does say that she is working hard to make sure this happens for us in Grey Bruce. Another thing would be an opportunity to work with staff to determine possible locations throughout Grey County. This is a very co-located model. Later on today, I'm meeting actually at the Owen Sound OPP detachment to meet with John, I think it's Craney, if that's correct, I hope, to be able to look at a possible location there. So we're always looking at different locations, and then a chance to collaborate with the Grey County staff who may wish to support this work, including youth services, social services, housing, etc. Okay, thank you for your attention and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Shannon, for that comprehensive report or presentation. Are there any questions from council? Councilor Matrosovs, please.
Thank you. Through you, the warden, thank you very much for the presentation. And when I had a look at your website, I was very pleased to see both in the presentation and hear from what you've just said about how engaged your youth are along the way for making the decisions. So making sure that these are actually representing youth design, as you mentioned. So the Youth Action Council that you have that covers Bruce County along with the others, what is the representation that you have across Grey County, and if you're able to share across the 9 municipalities that we have?
Thank you. I don't know if I can give you a specific. I do know that was one area of concern for us for a very long time. We had lots of Huron Perth youth, obviously, as an educator in Huron Perth, that was easy for our Youth Action Council. We did put a call out. So we sent it to the Grey Bruce Governance Table and said, listen, we need your help. We don't have enough representation from Grey Bruce. Grey Bruce or Georgian Bay Youth Roots actually put it out on their site, and we had 9 additional members sign up. A lot of males. They are not reflected on the website because they're fairly new. This was only in the last couple of weeks, but we are always putting it out there to encourage other organizations. We know it's mandated across multiple counties to have youth representation at multiple levels. So we're always happy to have additional youth join. But yes, we do have much more from Grey Bruce now. So that's almost half. But I can't really split it up between Grey Bruce. I haven't asked those questions. And I don't attend the Youth Action Council meetings. I want them to have their voice. We provided a co-led agenda or co-designed agenda, and then the Youth Action Council engagement lead that work.
Excellent. Any other questions? Councillor Keaveney, please.
Thank you, Mr. Borden, and I really appreciate your presentation, Shannon. And just a thought or a suggestion. I wondered if you considered taking your presentation to any of the service clubs, Rotary clubs, for example, because as a Rotarian, I can suggest that we'd be interested in hearing from you. And when you get into your fundraising efforts, please consider coming and talking to Rotary clubs.
Thank you so much. We actually do present to lots of social clubs. It seems like I'm a traveling roadshow right now, to be honest. We did just present to the Rotary Club in Grand Bend, to their club. So we're looking for obviously lots of other Rotarians, but other service clubs that would be interested. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Councillor Gregg, go ahead.
Thank you. And through you, Warden, thanks for the presentation today. I hear good things, great things at times of the launch pad in Hanover. So my question is, we can't look at these issues on an individual basis. There has to be a theme, or there has to be a more socially larger demographic that we're evaluating this in that light. So was there consideration or opportunities of collaboration with, there's no discussion about an entity like the Launchpad that's provided a lot of success. You seem to be correlated very much alongside in terms of your goals and aspirations. Why does this idea not just complement and work alongside an entity like that?
That is a fabulous question. So we reached out to Launchpad over 2 years ago. Nicholas Magellan was the interim ED at that time. We spoke. He was very much in support of collaboration. Then they had Ms. Morrison, who was the executive director, and I think she's now working for Borealis Employment Services. So now the new executive director and I, we just haven't had a chance to meet, but we see ourselves very closely aligned with the work that they're doing in Hanover. We talk about this all of the time. Even David Willits from Keystone has said, like, they're like right there, like it's a great space. Like, you know, we talk about this all the time. We do see that it's a possible collaboration. It's just there's been a lot of turnover recently, so it's been hard to sort of keep up with that, but we definitely want to look at that. We've also had a collaborative conversation with Saugeen Sparks, doing very similar programming to Launchpad, I would say, from the sounds of that. So we've had a great conversation. I am presenting sometime to their board, and then, you know, wanting to look at their site that they have right now as well. So yeah, like I say, we are really interested in collaborating because we see that's there's already great stuff going on there. Why not sort of provide that additional service there as well? Thank you.
Any other questions from council? I note that there is a request for a letter of support. If anyone wants to go that route, Councillor DeBreen, you'll move that we provide that letter of support. Councillor Matrosov, you're seconding. Okay. Any discussion, questions? Any further questions for Shannon before I call the vote on that motion? Not seeing any. I'll call the vote. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you so much for your presentation this morning, Shannon. We really appreciate your time and all the good work that you're doing in the community. Thank you. Thank you. Take care. Okay. I'm thinking we're almost ready for a break, but before we do that, let's see if we can get a couple more items done. Consent agenda. Is there any request for any of those items to be withdrawn for further discussion? Not seeing any, I'll ask for a motion to adopt and receive all those items. Counselor Keaveney, seconded by Counselor Mackey. Why that is such a problem this morning? I don't know. I was doing so well the last couple of months. Anyway, that's good. Any discussion on the motion? All those in favor? That is carried. Let's see, items for. Do we want to break before we start discussion items? Yes? All right, let's break. I see it's just a few minutes before 10 or 11. Let's reconvene at 11 o'clock. 1 minute warning. Okay, I'll call the meeting back to order. Or do I need to wait for you, Rob? Or we're good to go? All right, thank you. Call the meeting back to order. Items for direction and discussion. 7A is report initiating Grey County's climate adaptation plan, and it will be represented. It will be presented by Megan Miles. Welcome, Miles. Oh, my goodness. Welcome, Ms. Miles, and the floor is yours.
There we go. Yeah, thanks so much, Warden Milne. So to date, our much of our efforts through Going Green and Grey have been focused on climate change mitigation, reducing our emissions to slow down the impacts of climate change. But the reality is our weather is changing, becoming warmer, wetter, and wilder. So recognizing these changes, it's part of our responsibility to protect public infrastructure and public safety. And developing an adaptation plan helps us do that. As we know, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. So every dollar spent on proactive adaptation measures today is estimated to save us $13 to $15 in indirect and direct savings. So that's a pretty good return on investment. So an adaptation plan has been identified as a priority action in Going Green and Grey, as well as in our corporate strategic plan. An adaptation plan would include identifying priority impacts, including infrastructure and services most likely to be impacted, and actions to help us become more resilient. Similar to Going Green and Grey, we're looking to include both county and community assets, which would help support member municipalities by allowing them to focus on their corporate plans, as some have already done. In working with ICLEI, as we did with our mitigation plan, we have an opportunity to work with a well-established organization that brings a wealth of experience and subject matter experts and lessons learned from municipalities across Canada. So far, we've been able to access a number of free resources through the ORCA, that's the Ontario Resource Centre for Climate Adaptation, through their outreach and engagement program. Part of this was developing a working group. We recognize that we can't do this work on our own, so we have assembled a working group of internal and external partners. This diverse group will help us develop a comprehensive plan that considers the impacts of the built environment, natural environment, social, and economic systems. So due to delays in the FCM funding announcement, our challenge is we were initially expecting that announcement in the spring, but we had this gap between the ORCA program and FCM funding opportunity. So we're looking to maintain current momentum that ensures that we can complete the plan on time and on budget without relying on the FCM funding, which we're hopeful about, but is not guaranteed. So our recommendation is to purchase a core Building Adaptive and Resilient Communities membership and facilitation package from ICLEI Canada, which is the only organization that offers the coaching approach. And this is a pretty great hybrid between a fully consultant-led approach or a fully staff-led approach. So we're able to get the staff capacity building that we need. So these are some of the supports that the ICLEI membership includes. So we'd have a dedicated liaison to work with over the next 12 to 16 months, access to research assistance, and they've gone through this process with many other municipalities. So they would be able to guide us along the way and access their online tool. So we've more or less completed milestone 1, the initiation phase, which is about building your team. And now we're working on milestone 2, which is the research phase. We're due to have a climate science report completed later this month with detailed projections. And then we'll move on to identifying impact statements in our first workshop. And then this membership would take us to the end of milestone 3 with a complete adaptation plan by the end of next year. This shows how the different milestones line up with these different programs currently in the ORCA, which is the free program. And then we would be doing the ICLEI BARC membership. And then if successful, the FCM funding would help us take us into the implementation phase. So no additional budget is required to purchase the BARC membership. We'd be using existing funding from our operating and capital budgets. Assuming a 60-40 split from FCM, as previous adaptation funding has included, this would also allow us to make the most of the FCM funding opportunity and leverage that. We can't confirm the matching percentage until those funding details are announced. So the next steps are to complete the climate science report, kick off the process with our first workshop, and then we'll be looking to, with council support, apply for the FCM funding opportunity when it's announced. Developing our climate adaptation plan is an important step towards preparing our community for current and future changes. And the recommended approach provides us with an opportunity to work with an experienced organization while also building our staff capacity across departments to make us well positioned for implementation. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Megan. Thank you very much for that presentation. Are there any questions from council? Councillor Matrosov and then Councillor Dubreen.
Thank you. Through you, the warden, I was very excited to see this come up on the agenda, and I was really pleased to see the reference to Georgian Bluffs and Owen Sound already participating in BARC. The Town of Blue Mountains is right there and ready as well. We built into our integrated community sustainability plan, our 20 bold actions. Action number 3 is indeed collaboration with the Grey County in order to be able to explore this avenue. I think Ms. Miles hit it right on the head when she said, you know, these are experienced organizations. ICLEI has a wealth of experience and knowledge to be able to build and support us. I love this idea about making good use of staff and not just resorting exclusively to consulting, but actually making sure that we bring that knowledge and that expertise in-house in all of our municipalities that way. I certainly had the opportunity to really see the potential of the ICLEI organization because we've known Mr. Jeff Fletcher on our staff. Our sustainability manager at the Town of Blue Mountains is actually a board member on ICLEI Canada, and so we've always had that connection. But in my travels last year, I realized what a wealth of knowledge to be passed on and shared there is in the ICLEI organization worldwide. We can learn so much from them so that we can, in my opinion, this is an excellent investment of dollars because we will get so much of a return back on that.
Thank you, Andrea. Any response, Megan? Good. Just before I go to Councillor Dubreen, a note that Randy's had a big hand in this as well. So Randy, do you have anything to add before we go any further?
Thank you, Warden Milne. And yeah, just to echo Councillor Matrosov's comments, we agree. We think this is the best approach to be able to utilize the knowledge and resources from a coaching and facilitation perspective with ICLEI, but being driven by staff and folks on the ground, community partners like conservation authorities and others, to be able to move forward with identifying a plan that makes sense for us collectively as Grey County, as well as corporately. So as we know, we've seen the impacts of storms and others on our infrastructure, whether it's roads, bridges, culverts, buildings, you name it. We've seen some impacts from some of the storms. And this plan will identify actions as well as areas that we need to focus on in order to be more resilient to those storms. So not only from a corporate perspective, but how can we work together as a community through community groups and partnerships to be able to advance this. So we're very excited about this. We think this will ultimately save overall dollars in terms of being able to create this plan. Just looking at a fully consultant-led process, based on some other adaptation plans that have been done throughout the province, you're looking at well north of $100,000 usually to do these plans. 150,000 is not uncommon based on what we've seen. So this $30,000 investment, which is already funds within our current budget, as Megan indicated, number that is being funded already from reserve as well, will help us advance this, get us a plan, as Megan indicated, by the end of this year. And really allow us to be able to move forward with planning and making sure we're being more resilient and planning for those infrastructure improvements or enhancements in order to combat some of the impacts we're seeing from various storm events caused by climate change.
Thank you, Randy. And of course, it's been reminded to the warden that I don't have a mover and seconder yet, so I need that. Councillor Carlton. Councillor Mattressauce, thank you very much. Councillor Jabrine, please.
Thank you, Warden Milne. Good morning. I actually am very supportive of this. I had a number of comments that have already been shared, but I feel that this is going to put us in such a great position, not only for our own resiliency, but for when FCM does announce that funding window, we'll be in a better position, I think, through this membership and through the knowledge that we staff, everyone are going to gain from it. So I just wanted to thank you for your report.
Thank you. Councillor Eccles.
Thank you. I guess one of the things that caught me, and I apologize for coming in slightly late, but the one thing that caught me was that we're doing this and then you use the word upstaff or get our staff up to the staffing levels that we're going to need to be able to implement this for the FCM funding and whatnot. Can I get clarification on that? Because building more staff is not something that, or red tape that I've ever endorsed.
Randy. Sorry, Megan. I saw Randy. I'll come back to you, Megan.
Thank you for that question, Councillor Eccles. And I think what the intent there is that utilizing existing staff resources by having them be part of these conversations, discussions, the development of the plan, but not increasing staff in order to deal with the impacts that we're seeing on climate change. It's more about how can we work together with existing staff resources, both county, local municipal level, as well as community partners to be able to mitigate this. So it's not increasing staff, it's working with existing staff and maybe upskill, up training, up knowledge, up education about how we can combat some of these things going forward.
Megan, do you have anything to add?
Believe a clarification that I was going to provide.
Good, thank you. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Warden. Just Owen Sound was in the report, and I would just like the opportunity to share with my colleagues that Owen Sound did not pay for any of the services. Was leveraged what was free out there, and we had a 6-month, approximately a 6-month contract individual who put our plan together. I'm not supportive of the further expenditure. I have the utmost respect for the presenter, Megan, and Rebecca online. I think you're extremely professional, extremely capable, and I think we should live within the resources which we currently have on staff. I'm not convinced of the need to have a partial consultant, ICLEI, come on board to facilitate further group discussion, data gathering and consolidating. A lot of those groups and partners, many of them are within this building. If ICLEI was serious about helping us with adaptation, they could have provided a carbon emission measurement in terms of what this would even cost for carbon emissions to undertake their participation, whether it's travel or food, resources, meetings. There's a cost to everything. When it comes down to the discussion of being on time or being slightly delayed, I'm in favor of using our current resources and living with a slight delay if it just means that we're not able to achieve a certain month. This isn't something that I think is time sensitive. So I'm not in favor of the further expenditure at this time, and I'm not in favor largely because I think a lot of our residents in Grey County wouldn't support us expending those funds in this manner either.
Thank you, sir. Randy, did you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Thank you through you, Warden, and thank you, Councillor Greg, for those comments. Obviously, we'll take direction from council in terms of how you would like us to proceed. As Megan indicated, we are able to we're actually getting free resources right now through the ORCA program that we applied for and were successful for. This is to continue that momentum that we are able to get through those free resources. As noted, and as Councillor Greg indicated, as well as his comments, if it's fully staff-led, it'd be delayed. We also then wouldn't have access to some of the knowledge and resources that ICLEI brings to the table. That they've developed this BARC process based on funding they received from FCM, and I think Georgian Bluffs and Owen Sound at the time there was a pilot project that was. To be able to work through some of that process at the time. Unfortunately, that part is no longer free. And so there is a bit of a cost to it to help have the coaching and facilitation and getting access to some of those resources. So, but we're happy, of course, to take direction from council and where they would like us to go. That time frame, as Megan indicated and shown on the screen, would be delayed if that is the direction from council. But we're happy to obviously take direction from council where you would like to go.
Thank you, Randy. Councillor Nielsen.
Thank you, Warden Milne. Just a question for staff regarding the draft terms of reference for the Climate Adaptation Committee. Councillor Gregg's concepts and conversations and ideas of how to move forward is if we didn't go with the BARC membership, is the plan still to bring together that climate adaptation working group? The majority of the membership was community-led initiatives, experts in our community and such. Just wondering if there's a response from staff on that one.
Megan?
Yeah, I think in order for this plan to be in this planning process to be successful, like we can't do adaptation on our own. It's a community effort. So I think we have to find a way to make it work and to continue to engage those external partners. Regardless of the direction from council. So as Randy mentioned, it might be at a different timeline. We would adapt the timeline. This is a draft terms of reference, and we were going to be approving that at the first workshop. So we would adjust that timeline accordingly, but I think we still need to engage all of those stakeholders that are involved in adaptation in order to set us up for implementation.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Warden. And through you, I guess a question to Randy. I continue to struggle a little bit with what the responsibility of Grey County is for planet adaptation or climate adaptation, and what the responsibility of the province and the federal government is, and that there's not duplication happening here. In my mind, the bigger question, this should go to the province. And we see 120 municipalities across Canada that have been involved. So that means a lot aren't involved. So do we have it right, or do they have it right? Locally, there's a lot of upper tier governments that aren't involved. So I guess I'd like to know, why are they not participating? And there's only 3 or 4 from the report that are participating in this. So I need more information on why it's our responsibility to spend our taxpayers' dollars on this and not a provincial responsibility or a federal responsibility. Thanks.
Randy?
Yeah, and I think based on previous conversations and discussions around climate change, whose responsibility it is, I think the responsibility rests with every level of government. I think municipalities as a whole, we have probably the greatest control or impact, because 70% of the infrastructure that is we're seeing impacted by storms is owned by municipalities. So having our corporate assets looked at to see how we can plan for some of these events, how can we work together to to address some of these events, I think is part of the key takeaway, I guess, that this plan will hopefully provide some insight and some actions that work for Grey County. So looking at, provincial policy statement or the planning statement now that it's called, the province has provided overall direction that considering the impacts of climate change and other things is something that planning authorities and decision makers need to be looking at. So again, going back to where the responsibility lies, that has to be looked at by municipalities when we're making decisions. And this is just an example of looking at through a development application lens or through a planning lens. So I think there's some responsibility for sure that rests with municipalities, but I think all levels of government have to be involved in this. And that's where through partnerships, through funding, some other things that we're trying to take advantage of to be able to move the yardsticks of these things so that it's not we're seeing cost savings potential, which this proposed recommendation would see cost savings. As I noted, normally a plan of this nature would be north of 100,000 for sure, 150,000. So by a $30,000 investment that's currently within the budget, that we see that's going to get us to the same point where municipalities are heading. Other counties and municipalities have moved forward with this. Some local municipalities, as noted in the report, Georgian Bluffs, Owen Sound, are focusing on their corporate assets. So this allows us to work together with all the municipalities to look at what does it look like from a community asset perspective. So this gives us both our corporate plan for the county as well as community asset plans. So we think it's money well spent, and having the staff as well as municipalities and partners involved in this process, I think will be key, because then it's a plan that works for all of us in Grey County.
Thank you, Randy. Any others? Kim, do you have something to add?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Warden. The other piece that I would add to this is that climate change has a direct impact on the county's bottom line when it comes to our risk ratings and what our insurance costs are. And, part of the report that will come to Budget and Finance next week talks about what's happened with insurance rates. And I'm sure that you've all heard lots of media reports from the Intact Center on climate change, and and I should call it what's actually called, which is the Intact Center on Climate Adaptation, which is really focused on thinking about what we're facing and what requirements we're going to have to step up to in the future. We're not into the specifics in this report, but when you think about what's the value of having these resources, what I see is that we're going to have the benefit of the experience and the knowledge of all of those who've come before about what's the data that needs to be analyzed, what process do you use to organize the information that you're trying to assess, what's the order of operations that the recommendations should be providing to us, right? This is big, complicated stuff. And the whole idea of having an experienced external resource available to us is to try and do this in a way that's efficient and effective, and that all the people around the table are going to be able to see themselves in, so that at the end of the day, we need something we can implement and implement quickly. And that's where I hope that this guidance can be of benefit to us, is to scope it down so that we're able to deliver for all of you and for the community. Thanks.
Thanks, Kim. Any other? Oh, Councillor McQueen, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Good discussion. I always try to draw on practical experience. Also, I think it was in July of 2013, Toronto received a huge weather event. And I think it just repeated itself this summer, and the people are saying, why is it happening again? I think that's one example of a practical situation. We see it in Jasper, how there was a situation there. It happened. I think we do have to adapt to our climate. We know it's changing. was at FCM, as yourself, Mr. Warden, this past June. Talking to people across the country, it was one of the warmest winters across the country. So we know weather is changing. And I think a number of years back, talking to the mayor of Calvin at the time, Mr. Thompson, they did a study on their culvert size, whether they are ready for a big rain event, and assessed all their culvert sizes and probably adapted changes wherever. So I think we probably need to get a plan in place to identify our vulnerable spots, because like I said, this summer, people in Toronto said, why did it happen again? People's basements were flooded, things were happening, a repeat of what happened in, I think it was 2013 or whenever that time in July. So we see big rain events. We see, like, I don't know how many years ago in Peterborough received 4 or 5 inches of rain in 2 hours. And remember that. So these events are happening not far away, but close by in the last 10 to 20 years. So I think, I guess through you, or maybe to Randy and the experts here that are telling us this, is this going to give us that plan that will identify areas that we can, at least consider that are vulnerable for those weather events? And it's not just heavy rain, it's dryness, it's a lot of different things. So I guess that's my question. Is this going to at least put us at that first base that sort of says, okay, these are the areas that are identified, you need to consider some changes here. So that's my question.
Randy, I see your hand up, please.
Through you, Mr. Warden, and thank you for the comments and questions, Councillor McQueen. And to quickly respond, yes, that's exactly what the adaptation plan will be able to provide. Also thinking in terms of, you made mention of upsizing culverts and other things like that as an example. By having an adaptation plan, it allows us to also access funding as it becomes available. We're seeing a lot of infrastructure funding and grant funds that are tied to looking at how you've incorporated and considered the changing climate in terms of your infrastructure projects. So again, this will help us to hopefully leverage some further grant funding down the road as well.
Thank you, Randy. Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I don't disagree with anything Randy just said or Councillor McQueen, but my understanding was, through Conservation Authority permits, we're already sizing for the 100-year storm. So is it not duplication?
To whom would you like to direct that question? Whoever would like to answer it. Randy, your hand's up again. Go ahead, please.
I'll try to take a stab at that one. So what we're seeing in just some of the storms that Councillor McQueen indicated, what we're seeing is in some cases 1 in 1,000+ year storms that are happening more frequently. We've seen them here in our own county in terms of more than just the 100-year storm. So the questions that come to me is then, what do we then need to plan for? What is the right balance of planning for our infrastructure supports, especially our key infrastructure? So part of this would be identifying, okay, what is the infrastructure that has to remain no matter what when it comes to emergency response from an emergency management perspective? What's that key infrastructure that we need to make sure that it survives whatever, a 1 in 1,000-year storm or plus? So that's just an example of what this plan and what some of these conversations and discussions that we hope to have with folks around the table in terms of looking at this. So you're right, we have great data in terms of at least planning and knowing what our potential hazards are and risks are from a 1 in 100-year storm, but we know we're seeing more than that in storm events that we're all experiencing and our communities are experiencing. And so how do we then plan and be resilient and adapt to those storms?
Thanks, Randy. Anyone else? Rebecca, your hand's up. Go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Randy. And I just wanted to add that climate adaptation is also beyond just looking at storms. We're thinking about potential economic impacts on everything from tourism to agriculture, as well as just impacts on vulnerable populations. If there's a flooding event, if there's a heat event, there's just a lot of moving pieces, and ICLEI really has expertise in all of those areas that we're looking to tap into.
Thank you, Rebecca. Councillor Gregg.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the second opportunity to speak to the motion on the floor. I would also like to request a recorded vote. We've talked about a couple items, conservation authorities was spoken to. They do an exceptional job of looking after people on a go-forward basis and also retroactively. And we have items in front of us at the municipal levels such as stormwater management plans. I see a lot of this stuff is already in place. I heard the word duplication. That's something that I think is certainly relevant to the conversation, but I just was looking to certainly call the recorded vote, please.
Okay, and that has been duly noted when we get to that step. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. Just to follow up, a couple things. I know just this summer, there was a very early hurricane that came up through this area. In 24 hours, I know my dad's rain gauge measured over 4 inches of rain in 24 hours. And I think some places received 5. But I think in a bigger picture, it's been mentioned about other levels of government, maybe there needs to be a remapping of that the conservation authorities use. Maybe I think nationally, maybe a change in building code on how your house is constructed. I would think back in the years when cars didn't have seatbelts. I guess it took to a number of times that people kept bouncing off the windshield till they finally realized they need a seatbelt. And it's, and the safety of cars have came a long way. So I think we gotta, to a certain degree, pull our heads out of the sand and sort of look at this holistically in the sense that, yeah, I think we do need to do something. And I think it is all level of governments that needs to, not necessarily maybe from what we can do on a carbon side, but in the sense of what we can do from reacting to the changes in our weather. And I think we need to at least look at that.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Councillor Body, you sure? Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
I'm almost sure. I think the roof in this building when it was bought is supposed to last 20 years, but will it? The road that we just put down that's supposed to last X, will it? It's not just rainstorms. It's how many buildings do we own that have roofs? What are we going to be doing with tires on vehicles? What are we doing with roads? What are we doing with roofs? What are we doing with how much water is that going to require to start to cool things? What's the cost going to be for air conditioning the building when it's a month of 35 degree? There's so many other things beyond just a storm coming that literally, not figuratively, who knows what that storm is coming that, that's more than a storm. I think there's a whole bunch of stuff. Andrea, these are the guys that presented at Chicago, right? At the, yeah. So when we went to the Great Lakes Cities Initiative in Chicago a full year ago, it was this group that did a presentation throughout 2 days that took us through different workshops, and they're international. They've got connections over the place. They've got expertise that we won't have. I agree that maybe we don't need them in a couple of years. Maybe we don't need them now, but I think at this point, till we can build out a plan and really know what we're doing and some of those other things that are unknowns at this time, it's nice to have help from somebody that does know what they're doing. $29,000. I don't know if it was 290, I'd be gulping pretty hard, but I'm leaning towards supporting it.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else? Councillor Eccles.
A number of years ago, the province came out with a wonderful idea that all lower and upper tier municipalities and everybody, we had to have an asset management plan. Take a look at all of your assets and what do you need and what's it going to take to replace them? Well, I'm pretty sure at the time I said, we already know, I've got staff on in West Grey that knows where every culvert is and who ran into it last year and which snowplow went off the road and well, no, we couldn't in West Grey tell you how many bridges are damaged and which ones are closed this week. But we've gone to an asset management plan. And I'm not sure that by putting all of that, hiring staff to do it, getting consultants to do it and whatnot, what in the ongoing, keeping all of that in place, we got a plan. But I think we already had the plan. Do we look internally, even in this, it's another, well, we've got to have a plan. Do we spend way too much time? What time is it going to take to put this plan in place? And we already have great staff. Pat Hoy must be away today, checking on, bridges and everything else out there. He's at work. We've got a lot of knowledge. Anne Marie's got a lot of knowledge on what we have and what information. But we continue to make plans. Okay, it'll be 2 years down the road. We have a plan. Instead of depending on the staff that we already have, get going and put things in place. I'm not so certain, Madam CEO, that insurance companies, whether we have a plan or not, are going to do us great service and cut our insurance rates by 40%, even 4%, because they can't predict when the next storm and how effective or what it's going to do to us. But they up the premiums in the thought that it is going to hit, whether you're prepared or not. And I guess taking a look at Calgary the other day, your point, Mr. McQueen, second largest one there in July when they got hit with that hail. Second largest in Canadian history, next to Fort McMurray burning. It's more philosophical and strategic. We sit around and do a lot more planning than we do action. And I'm struggling. Do we need more plans? No, I think we need more action on the assets that we already have. And no, instead of making plans for the federal government and or somebody out there, another political group. I'm glad that Mr. Gregg asked for a recorded vote. It'll give me more time on how I'm going to vote on this aspect. Because I do believe we'll start over there with Chatsworth with those one of those Macs over there will start the vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor Mackey.
Could I request that we go counterclockwise, Mr. Ward?
I'm not even going to defer to the clerk because I know she's going to say no. Okay, I think Councillor DeBreen, go ahead.
Thank you, Warden Milne. And I want to go back to members' privilege of our county council and councillor bodies' observations of how ahead of the curve Grey County is in so many areas. And they all started with a plan. And I think that staff have done a tremendous job up to this point in time. And they're asking for some additional support and guidance to take it to the next level that will see action in a very short period of time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Councillor McQueen, we're getting down to the short strokes here.
I'm only going to reiterate what happened this summer. It happened in 2013 and it happened again in Toronto, and the people are saying, why did this happen again? And talk about insurance. We're all paying for that major event. So, I mean, there's a lot of egg in the face of politicians that are down there today going, that happened twice. So I'm just saying as an example is, being proactive is sometimes better than sitting on your laurels and doing nothing either, right? So, especially if a major event has happened once.
Okay. Oh, sorry. Fortunately, thank you. Okay, Councillor Kentner.
I think the first evidence that I can remember of climate change was actually Hurricane Hazel. And some of you in the room are not old enough to remember it, but a great many people died in the Toronto vicinity. And I saw the results of it both in Toronto. I lived on Scarborough Bluffs, and we also had a cottage on Georgian Bay. And when we got up to look at the damage there, you know, it was a 100-mile swath that took through southern Ontario. And I guess what I'm going to say, because I remember my older brother as a Queen Scout helped recover bodies in the area of the rivers that were affected. And I think that the ultimate solution there was the conservation areas that we rely on today, largely downloaded to us as municipalities. But, you know, how do you tell, you know, if people have died? Well, it was really a federal responsibility, or the province should have done that. If we can do it, we need to. Thank you.
Thank you, Ross. Anyone else? Okay, really good discussion. I think I'll ask the clerk to take the vote.
Counselor Mackey, Counselor Mackey is opposed. Counselor McKay. Counselor McKay in favor. Counselor Carlton in favor. Counselor Pringle
Opposed.
opposed. Counselor McQueen in favor. Counselor Nielsen in favor. Counselor Patterson in favor. Counselor Dickert in favor. Counselor Kentner in favor. Counselor Keaveney in favor. Counselor Body in favor. Counselor Gregg opposed. Gordon Milne
In favor.
in favor. Counselor Dobreen in favor. Counselor Matrosovs in favor. Counselor Bordignon
Opposed.
opposed. Counselor Eccles
Don't need to. Oh.
Counselor Eccles is opposed. Counselor Hutchinson in favor. That motion is carried 66-30.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, council, and thank you, Megan and Randy, for your help to get through that. Thank you. The next report is a sole source report, purchase of mechanical compression devices. This is going to be a presentation by Kevin McNabb, our Director of Paramedic Services. Welcome, Kevin, and the floor is yours. Oh, I need a mover and seconder, please. Counselor Dobreen, Counselor Eccles. Thank you. Kevin?
The wrong red light. Good morning, Warden, County Council. Pleased to be here today to talk to you about mechanical compression devices. We're here to seek your approval to purchase these devices as a sole source as well. The purchasing amount is greater than what we had budgeted for in our capital budget for 2024. So we seek the approval to receive this report and to sole source these devices to where it is. So sole source the devices to Zoll Canada and to make up the shortfall of 52,000 from our Safe Start Reserve. So for us in paramedic services, our patient care standards are updated on a regular basis based upon medical evidence known at the time through the Ministry of Health, but it's led by a group of emergency physicians from across the province. In February 2023, they opened up our cardiac arrest standard and looked at it as far as best evidence for resuscitation. And they found that continuation of CPR longer than the typical 6 to 8 minutes before any determination for transportation or termination of the resuscitation was made, that they would increase that time. And it's been that time since then. So majority of our calls, like for resuscitation, unless they remain in a shockable rhythm or a trauma victim or some special circumstances, before we transport, it's 20 minutes of CPR at the scene. In spring of 2023, I was here and very happy for the support to be able to purchase these devices for the trucks, and they've been well used since. We purchased 11 of them. It was for our frontline ambulances and for our emergency response vehicle and our supervisor. Typically, when we do buy capital items, we do buy them for every unit so that when we're ready to go, the unit's stocked with the appropriate equipment and they're not moved around from vehicle to vehicle. And we also have technically spares in the system if something's down to be able to make sure the front line has them at all times. At that time, there was two devices. We went to tender and Zoll Canada won. We purchased the Zoll AutoPulse 100 unit. At that time, it was just called the AutoPulse because there really wasn't another AutoPulse at the time, but we since know it is the 100 version. One thing we didn't know at that time, though, is that is time limited. We knew they had another one in development, but we didn't know this one would be time limited on support. We have learned since that this one is only covered till the end of 2028. So mechanical CPR devices, there's lots of advantages to that. The effectiveness of CPR is no different than manual CPR. CPR being that and defibrillation are one of the most effective interventions that we can do for cardiac arrest, even with all the other fancy IVs and drugs and tubes and stuff like that. It's really is CPR and defibrillation that saves people in cardiac arrest. These devices being mechanical, they help us out when resources are low. It allows us to focus on other patient care. It allows us to focus on the family and other people, and then also be able to prepare for transport. It also helps us in tight places and helps us during extrication. When we're carrying people out of the house, it's almost impossible to do CPR. It's impossible to move it when we're moving to the stretcher into the hospital. But these devices, once they're attached, they continue CPR throughout the whole time. It also allows for greater paramedic safety because now the paramedics don't have to, or the firefighters don't have to stand up in the back of the ambulance on the way to the hospital. They can remain belted and they don't have to be up standing over top of the patient. In June of 2024, Zoll released their newest model just this past year, and that's when we learned about the end of life for other units. This is a smaller and lighter design, which would be welcomed by the paramedics because the other device is a little bit heavier and a bit bigger. And it also, this device will be through its useful life of 8 to 10 years. The 2024 budget, we did budget for 8 units, 6 to ensure our spares are outfitted, and also for the 2 ambulances that are part of the enhanced shifts for this year. The approved budget for 2024 was 119,900, and it was to be provided through the Safe Start Restart Fund. The purchase, if allowed, would be 168,876 now. Budget shortfall of 52,449. we're recommending that this shortfall be made up from this Safe Restart fund. That with the balance right now at 568,841. Also, with this new information, we will have to look at our 10-year capital plan to repurchase those original 11 units instead of 2031, now to be in 2029. Just around financial for a sole source, we do need approval for council for anything over $75,000. We're recommending the Zoll Autopulse NXT because the function is similar. It's a band versus a compression plunger. Is familiarity for the paramedics for something that they already have. And it'll give us consistency in our equipment so that when we have a vehicle, it'll show up with a CPR compression device. So we're not having to move them around, and it also gives us ability for spares.
Thank you, Kevin. Any questions from council? Councilor Gregg.
Thank you, Warden. Disappointing to hear that they are not servicing beyond 5 years. I hope the staff are comfortable that they've changed, their business perspective on these units, and they're assuredly servicing or can guarantee us 8 to 10 years and a better lifespan. My question is the 6 spare ambulances, as it's reported in the report or indicated in the report. How often are those on the fleet, or how often do they sit? And these are portable devices. So I'm just wondering the actual utilization of the spare ambulances, if they're in the shop, being these are portable devices, can we, do we have flexibility to just take these devices out and put it into the spare ambulance while it's on active duty in that occasion? And if so, was there consideration in just reducing the purchase by 1 or 2 to stay within budget?
So typically with our spare ambulances, the majority are used like 4 years frontline, 2 years spare. That's the way we run it. But we've also started now on where we have our night shifts. We have them actually work in a night truck. So what that does is allow to kind of spread out the kilometers a bit. What this allows us to do in end of shift overtime, when cars are out, when a car comes in, when the crew comes in, they will take that ambulance that's there. So it's that moving back and forth. Can it be done? Yes, it can. It has been done now. Like we actually, we function that way with 11, but it is, we can't consistently ensure that they're in every truck when they go out. That's the issue. And then if there's breakdowns or things that these are relatively new, but if we know with our defibrillators or cardiac monitors, even having those extra ones when we get 2 or 3 that need maintenance, it's tough to move it around and keep the front line functioning.
Thank you, Kevin. Any other questions? Councillor Ackles.
Thank you, Kevin. And I think that, it's a great thing to have these, especially since, and the idea that we're going from 6 to 8 to 10 minutes to 20 minutes that Ministry of Health has recommended, which is tremendous because transportation that we're going to have to do once rural healthcare is revamped here. This is just a download to our ambulance service as ERs continue to close across rural Ontario, and especially here, as we've seen in Grey County, and as we're going to see in Grey County, I assume. Anyways, so again, healthcare should be the Ministry of Health that's paying for this fully, as our ambulances take over more of hospitalization work and ER work, because the Ministry of Health is refusing to keep these ERs open in rural Ontario. Just a comment.
Thank you, sir. Any other questions from council? I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Kevin. The next report we have is a report on the tender award for the Durham Paramedic Base, which everyone is aware of, I'm sure. And this one is going to be taken by Randy. So welcome, Randy. Oh, I need a mover and seconder. Counselor Hutchison, seconded by Counselor Deckard.
Great, thank you, Warden Milne. So this report is recommending that Dom Construction be awarded the design build contract for the new paramedic services base in Durham at a cost of just over $2.4 million, excluding HST. This will be funded from the existing 2024 paramedic services capital budget. And we're also recommending that staff be authorized to proceed with preparing the CDCC contract prior to formal council approval, just so we can get working with the contractor to finalize the design and being able to start the construction as soon as possible. So as council will recall, following the completion of the paramedic services comprehensive deployment review, we investigated options in terms of where to locate this paramedic base. This is the first of several bases that's recommended in that deployment review in order to not only enhance response times and coverage, but also to, just remain those current response times based on projected growth and our changing demographics that are anticipated over the coming years. The investigation determined that the ideal location for the new base would be located adjacent to the West Grey Police Station, and based on the bylaw that was approved by council earlier this morning, that's the property that will be purchased from West Grey, and we'll be working with West Grey on the finalization of the road and servicing works that will service both the base and police station. So a design build request for proposal was released in July 10th for the paramedic base in Durham and closed on August 21st. There were 3 proposals received, and those were evaluated against predefined criteria and points that were weighted in the RFP. Dom Construction was the highest scoring respondent based on the number of points, with all criteria considered, which included the cost. So the total budget for the new paramedic base, including land, professional fees, and consulting and construction costs, is $3 million. The project is to be funded from the Durham Base Reserve, as well as development charges and a debenture. The 2024 capital budget includes $2.4 million. So that was the estimated construction cost when we were preparing the 2024 budget. So as noted, the bid cost from Dom to finalize both the design as well as constructing the base comes in at $2.458 million when you factor in non-refundable HST. So while the construction costs are $58,000 over the construction budget, professional fees on this project are expected to be under budget, resulting in the total project cost being under the $3 million budget that we have. So this is just showing a breakdown of the construction costs, the land acquisition preparation costs, as well as the professional fees. So as you can see, based on the total difference between what we originally budgeted, what's expected on those costs, we're coming in still under budget based on all those costs. Just to note, in terms of the climate change action plan contributions, so we worked with Kevin, Jeff, Aaron, Whitney, and the housing team to, as well as climate change staff, to look at incorporating some of the energy efficiencies. So these are the things that we will also be able to see some return on investment with that, with lower utility costs going forward. So we've incorporated some of that is already in the design specs that were bid on by Dom. So those are already within the budget. There's some other things that we might be able to enhance by applying through some FCM funding. So we're getting the rooftop solar ready by putting conduit in and making sure the structure will support solar panels. If we get FCM funding, that would allow us to actually purchase the solar panels to install on the roof. All still within the budget. And that would essentially give us a full net zero facility if we were to achieve that. Here's a rendering. I think we previously showed this in a slide deck previously, showing what the new base will look like. And this is just an overview of the site plan. So at the top there, you'll see that's Grey Road 4. The base is that building that's closer to Grey Road 4. And you can see we're designing an emergency access, vehicle access that's right off that building, right access to Grey Road 4. So that's just to help with getting ambulances on Grey Road 4 as quick as we can. The police station is just to the south of paramedic station there. So that's that bigger building to the south. So you can see how the paramedic base and the police station properties will essentially be laid out once this project is completed, as well as the West Gray Police Station, which is under construction as we speak. So again, the recommendation is to award the design build contract to Dom Construction for just over $2.4 million. And that's will be funded from the existing approved budget, and to proceed with finalizing that contract prior to council formal approval. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Randy. Are there any questions from council? Nobody wants to ask why the land was overcharged? Nope. All right, not seeing any questions. I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much, Randy. Next report is on the regarding the county official plan amendment 23 rural permitted uses and development policies, and that's going to be by our planner Scott Taylor. Someone care to move that, please? Councillor McQueen, seconded by Councillor Matrosovs. Thank you. Scott, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mr. Warden and members of County Council. Thanks for allowing me this opportunity. So what we have before us today is a proposed county official plan amendment to address some of the ambiguities and confusion around some of the county's rural designation policies. As council will be aware, the county official plan was approved by the province in June of 2019. We've updated it a number of times since then through two county initiated official plan amendments, being official plan amendment number 1 and number 11. And then there've been a series of private development applications which have amended the plan. Staff have now been working with the plan for approximately 5 years, and through working with the plan and seeing applications go through the process and seeing inquiries and questions from both potential developers and neighbors, there appears to be some confusion currently in the types of uses that can be permitted in the rural designation and the scale of those uses. As council will be aware, that the provincial policy directs that most non-farm or non-resource based uses be directed to our settlement areas. And so the intent of this official plan amendment, if council gives direction to go forward, would be to really try to make that crystal clear in our plan while still providing opportunities for some growth and economic development in our rural areas, because we know they are a crucial part of our county economy in that regard. As such, the proposed OPA 23 looks to clarify some of the permitted uses around agrominiums, residential farm cooperatives, resource-based recreational uses, rural special event venues, and rural institutional uses. There's also one policy change proposed in the agricultural policies, which also affect the rural policies, and that's simply based on a discrepancy whereby our agricultural policies say one thing and our primary aggregate policies say a conflicting thing. So it's just to kind of close the loop on that existing conflict. There's no proposed changes at this time to the county official plan mapping. So the lands that are rural will stay rural, and there's no changes in that regard. There's no changes to the agricultural boundaries or anything else. And this would apply countywide to any lands designated rural. So it would impact 7 of our 9 municipalities, because both the town of Hanover and the city of Owen Sound are completely primary settlement area and don't have any rural designations in that regard. You might be wondering why the amendment is coming forward at this time. Staff had drafted an early version of this amendment some months ago, but we were waiting to see the finalized version of the provincial planning statement 2024 before sort of finalizing that for council's consideration to initiate this process. So we have reviewed what's proposed in the draft official plan amendment number 23 with some of the new policies in the provincial planning statement, 2024, specifically sections 2.5 and 2.6, which deal with rural lands and rural areas in that regard. So a high level summary of some of the changes being proposed. As I said, we are trying to clarify that existing conflict between the agricultural policies and the agri-resource area policies. We're also looking at our permitted uses, so we're clarifying some of the terminology in there. We currently use the term churches. We probably should be using the term places of worship, because it's a little bit more inclusive in that regard. We're looking at adding a permitted use of a rural special event venue. This would be things like your wedding barns or other such venues, but it wouldn't apply to one-off special events like a harvest festival or a maple syrup festival in that regard, or an agriculturally focused event. And we're also clarifying some terminology with respect to being consistent with the new provincial planning statement, whereby dwellings that are associated with resource-based recreational uses are intended to be non-permanent dwellings. So you can't have a resource-based recreational use and put in a permanent subdivision in that regard based on the changes in the provincial planning statement. We're also looking to clarify some of those policies as it relates to, as I said, agrominiums, resource-based recreational uses, and residential farm cooperatives. We've learned a lot in the last 5 years of working with the plan, and so we're looking to speak to some of the changes in terms of how residential uses related to an agrominium or residential farm cooperative or a tourist operation would relate to the rural density. We're looking for a higher threshold of agricultural and resource use. Currently, the plan sits at 60%. We'd be looking for 75%. And we're clarifying some of the technical studies that would be needed through those applications. We're also clarifying that an agrominium could be supported via a plan of condominium, but all other lot or unit creation in the rural designation shall be done by consent, and we aren't looking for estate plans of subdivision in the rural designation. This isn't a dramatic change. This is already the way staff interpret the current policies, but based on some of the ambiguity, we feel there's a need to close a loop there, so to speak. With respect to some of the other policies we're looking to clarify, it's the development criteria associated with that residential lot or unit creation. Again, this is linking back to the new PPS, which speaks to non-permanent dwellings in that regard. So more of your seasonal dwellings rather than a permanent house. We're looking to add a subsection clarifying some of the criteria with respect to rural institutional uses. As council will be aware, we don't see a lot of new schools or places of worship or other institutional uses being built in our rural areas, but there are some, and particularly some where they serve the Mennonite and Amish communities in Grey County that don't have the ability to commute into town, so to speak. And then we're also looking to add a new subsection on rural special event venues. And these would be, as I said, your wedding barns or your concert or performance spaces. In my opinion, everybody thinks it's romantic to have an on the farm wedding, and that's wonderful. But if you're a neighbor to that farm, you might not enjoy that romance every weekend of the summer at 2 a.m. kind of thing when you're hearing the chicken dance for the 52nd time kind of thing. So we are looking to clarify some of those policies, put in some criteria, but we're trying to make it crystal clear that it doesn't apply to things like, a one-off wedding on a farm. This is more sort of a dedicated venue. It doesn't apply to agriculturally focused events like harvest festivals or maple syrup festivals or farm education events. And then we're also looking to clarify some of the definitions and the terminology related to some of those uses that I just spoke about. So I need to make this 100% clear that this amendment, if council seeks to move forward with it, doesn't apply to any applications that are already in process. So the general rule of thumb is you submit your application and you're tested against the policy that's in place on the day that you're deemed complete when you submit your application. So if council saw fit to move forward here, this would apply if the amendment was later approved to new applications or new proposals. Should council endorse the staff recommendation today, we would be looking to move forward with the public and agency review process. There would be a public meeting scheduled for this one, and we'd be seeking input from a diverse range of stakeholders, including our own County Agricultural Advisory Committee. And we think that they would have some very valuable impact on, or very valuable feedback on some of these topics. Should we go forward, there would be a final staff recommendation and thorough planning analysis with a future staff report. We anticipate if we move forward, that would come likely sometime in early 2025. As such, the recommendation for today is that the report be received, that staff be directed to initiate the process, including circulating to the public and agencies, and that we also get that feedback from the Agricultural Advisory Committee and our own member municipalities in that regard. So that's what I have for you today on this one, but certainly be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Scott. Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and through you to Scott. Thank you for the report. A couple of things I just sort of pulled out there. Resource-based recreation, no permanent development. Can you give me a little bit more of an example around that? Where that would apply and where it wouldn't apply, or how that would, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for your question, Councilor McQueen. Sometimes as planners, we get into, thinking that these terms are well understood by everyone, but I probably should have explained that a little better. My apologies. So a resource-based recreational use is a use that's taking advantage of a natural resource as its prime motivator to be there. So one of the key ones would be, Blue Mountain Resorts is based around the escarpment and the hill, which permits skiing. We have other resource-based recreational uses. You might have a camp that's on a lake and surrounded by a forest, and the campers get to enjoy the natural amenities there. And so going forward, if this amendment were supported, we would still allow for those resource-based recreational uses, and we still think they are a key part of our rural economy. But what would be slightly more restricted is the types of residential uses. So if you want the camp, a kids camp, yeah, that's fine. You can totally have that, subject to meeting certain criteria. But if you're coming in and saying, we've got this beautiful lake and we've got this forest, we want to build, 75 permanent residential homes, that's where there'd be further restrictions. And there already are some restrictions in the county plan on that. But based on the language in the new provincial planning statement, we believe there's a need for further criteria in that regard to shape the types of uses that could be permitted on those rural lands versus those types of uses that might be better suited to a settlement area, like some of those permanent residential dwellings.
Thank you, Scott. You had another question, Councilor McQueen?
Well, just a follow-up to that and then another question. So basically you're saying is if there was a lake and then somebody created a golf course and the development around that, and that's very typical. So you're saying is there would be more stringent or more either amendments would have to be done if it was to move forward more in having those development or homes around that is what you're saying. It'd be more restrictive or more or a stricter process. Is that what you're saying? Okay, that's enough of that. My other question is seasonal dwellings versus permanent use. Goes back to maybe that recreational base, because probably in the last 50 years, there's probably many circumstances like, for example, Wasaga Beach was probably a seasonal place for a long time, or Saba Beach or that type of thing. But then things change and it becomes permanent. What do you mean by seasonal dwelling versus permanent dwelling? So what are you talking about there?
Through you, Mr. Warden. Yeah, that's a great question. This is terminology that comes directly from the provincial planning statement. And so, we think it could be interpreted in a number of different ways, but generally speaking, you wouldn't be looking at a residential dwelling on its own lot. You might be looking at, if you're taking the campground example, units that can be used, say 8 months a year. So if you picture, some traditional trailer parks or campgrounds in that regard, they would have a restrictions rate in the zoning to say they're not for year-round use in that regard. So it might be a wonderful place to spend your 8 parts of your spring, summer, fall kind of thing. But it's not, a 4-bedroom permanent dwelling in that regard. And we think the official plan will speak to this at a high level, but there'll need to be some detailed policies in municipal zoning in that regard, which really spells out the types of units or the types of dwellings that can be suited here. One of the things that we've seen in large portions of Grey County is dwellings that maybe used to be, non-winterized cottages or what have you. Somebody knocks the cottage down and builds a large new home there, or winterizes the cottage and suddenly it becomes a permanent residential use. So we're looking to work with municipalities on exactly the types of non-permanent residential units that could be cited there. Another one might be a lodge type use, whereby you don't own your individual lot or unit, but there's a lodge you can come and stay in for a weekend or a week in that regard and rent out, but they're all collectively under one ownership rather than individual ownership.
Go ahead.
So I just find that interesting because the investment that somebody would make to make a seasonal residence versus a permanent residence and the infrastructure seems to be going the wrong way, isn't it? I just think that if you're like, I think of Lake Eugenia, I'm sure for a big part of Lake Eugenia was a seasonal, a lot of them were seasonal cottages, but holy smokes, it's all changed now. They're all permanent residents and people live there and Same with Beaver Valley Ski Club and a lot of different areas are becoming more, we see that shift. So I don't know, are we going the wrong way here? I just asked that question because of what we've seen in the past and where development is and the infrastructure cost to develop that, so.
Any comments, Scott?
Through you, Mr. Warden, and maybe this is bleeding into the next report, but the original draft of the provincial planning statement, when they announced a draft in 2023, spoke to multi-lot rural residential development. There was a number of concerns on that by bodies from across the province, and the province has since pulled back on that in the final version of the provincial planning statement. So they've taken out that verbiage which spoke to multi-lot residential development. And they further said that for these resource-based recreational uses, they still see merit in having the recreational uses there, but they've restricted the associated residential uses in that regard. So the county is essentially trying to follow suit with what the province is seeing here. But we're also seeing in some of these older cottage or residential communities in the rural areas, more and more demands for services. And particularly if people move up here that might not be accustomed to a rural lifestyle or they're aging and they have different needs than they did when they bought the place. And we believe a lot of those needs are best served in our settlement areas where we have both those hard and soft services to support our residents in that regard. So, you know, I certainly can understand, you know, when you hear the messaging across the province that we need more housing, that it might be attractive to look at some of our rural areas and some of our recreational areas in this regard. And we still do believe there's some housing potential there, but not the large scale housing that we would otherwise see in our service settlement areas, or at least that's the opinion of staff at this time.
Thank you, Scott. Any last one?
Is, I think for a lot of our municipalities in Grey County, and I'll use Grey Highlands as an example, at one time, 35% of our assessment came from Lake Eugenia. So there's a difference in value of where your tax base comes from and where the demand and the drive is. And, you know, I look at Beaver Valley Ski Club, I look at all different things like that. One size does not necessarily fit all. And I just see from our tax base, and, you know, Chatsworth has a lake and other areas where there's a huge assessment comes from that. So I don't know, scratching my head on that one, Mr. Warden.
Very good. Any other questions? Councillor Eccles and then Councillor Gray.
Thank you. When you started, Scott, you said something about that this didn't have any effect on either the city of Owen Sound or the town of Hanover. So are you saying that all the agricultural lands that are in those two areas are A1 and not rural?
Through you, Mr. Warden. Thank you for your question, Councillor Eccles. So in this case, this applies to rural designated lands in the county official plan. And the city of Owen Sound and the town of Hanover are entirely designated primary settlement areas. So no doubt there'd be some potentially spin-off effects if there's less residential growth in certain portions of our rural areas. We might see it in more of our settlement areas, whether they be Durham or Hanover or Owen Sound or anywhere. But strictly speaking, this amendment only applies to those rural designations. And if I could, just one response back to Councillor McQueen as well. A lot of our inland lakes, like Lake Eugenia or other inland lakes, are in a settlement area designation. So this amendment wouldn't apply directly to those areas. It might apply to sort of the hinterlands or further out from the lakes, but it wouldn't impact the settlement areas directly.
Thank you, Scott. Any other Councillor Gregg, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Your last comments may have answered my question because I did have a couple of thoughts similar to Member McQueen. And for CRA purposes, for instance, someone could have the greater part of half a year as their permanent residence and then travel south and essentially rent that place according to within existing municipal bylaws, so short-term rental or et cetera. So I wondered how that might apply, that language in any of these odd circumstances that could populate. Also, you've altering churches for places of worship. Church is really defined, but a place is here 75 feet from the southeast of this building is also a place. Are staff comfortable with the language of place of worship, or is there ambiguity that could come from that terminology and embedding it into policy? Because sometimes we do see these issues that creep up where it's a little bit undefined, and place is very ambiguous.
Thank you for your questions and comments, Councillor Gregg, through you, Mr. Warden. Maybe I'll go the second one first. We can certainly look into that further. I believe a lot of our local zoning bylaws already have a defined term of a place of worship. And the thought is that it's meant to be a little bit more inclusive, regardless of what faith you might practice and who or where you might choose to worship in that regard. But we can certainly look into that terminology further, and if there's a need to insert a definition on what that means, even into the county official plan, we can look at that further. With respect to your first comment and question about about the seasonality and the tax impacts, certainly no expert there, and it's something we can look into as much as possible. We want to get away from these uses looking and feeling like a permanent residential dwelling, or having some sort of shell game where somebody could say, no, this is just my cottage, even though I'm here 5 days a week and only in the city 2 days a week, kind of thing. So we believe at this stage, the type of housing that would be supported here and would be recommended here would be a different form of housing. So it wouldn't look and feel like a primary residential dwelling. As I said, there's examples of trailer parks or other such uses that are only open, 6 or 8 months a year, kind of thing. So we can dig into that issue further and provide council with some better examples on exactly the type of non-permanent residential dwelling that could be considered here. But I worry if we, just go on somebody's goodwill in terms of, no, this is just my cottage, I'm not going to live here year round, then, that's not going to hold a lot of water. So we will look to try to clarify that further in the policy for council's consideration.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions? Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Warden, and through you to Scott. I'm trying to think of some specific examples, so I'm getting a better picture of this, Scott. Lincoln Park, for example, in Georgian Bluffs, would that type of development then not be permitted going forward at all? Because they're trailer / homes, but people do reside there year round. Another example where the warden had the golf tournament, that sort of development at Wilder Lake would no longer be permitted. Is that what I'm getting from what you're saying? Thanks.
Through you, Mr. Warden. Thanks for your question, Councillor Mackey. In this case, the Wilder Lake example, the large swaths around Wilder Lake are designated as an inland lakes and shoreline settlement area. So similar to Councillor McQueen's example about Lake Eugenia, this amendment wouldn't impact those settlement area designations. So it doesn't impact, Lake McCullough, where you have inland lakes and shoreline as well. With respect to Lincoln Park, I'd have to look up that property further. I can't remember whether that's in the rural designation or the agricultural designation. Generally speaking, we have a number of old communities in the county, whether they be trailer parks or campgrounds or sort of slightly different monikers. In some cases, those would still be permissible. In other cases, there might be new restrictions that exist today that didn't exist, 30 or 40 years ago or whenever they were submitted. So I could look into that one more specifically. But even if these policies didn't change, it would be more difficult today to get a new campground or trailer park of that nature, even under the current policies, let alone with these proposed changes, but happy to look into that further.
Thanks, Mr. Warden. I guess my comfort level is not, I don't understand it that completely to be able to just sign off on this now, because the impact will be to the rural municipalities and not to the city. So I want to make sure that, I fully understand what that impact is going to be.
Well, to be clear, we're not being asked to approve this today, right? This is just to start the process for an amendment. Correct, Scott? Yeah. So there'd be lots of consultation with the Ag Advisory Committee was one, all the lower tiers. There's going to be, there's there's quite a bit of runway ahead of us before we ask for your approval, Counselor Mackey. Okay? Okay, good. All right, any other questions? Counselor McQueen.
And you're right, we have lots of time to have conversations. I'm just gonna bring one other example into play. There's been a lot of change with mobile and modular homes, which we're sort of dealing with, and Grey Highlands, but we talk about affordability and we talk about a housing mix. And tiny homes are certainly coming back to be maybe that mix. And sometimes, where you need people to live or people want to live is not necessarily where you're pushing them to live. So if there was a proposal for a tiny home development or something like from a housing mix part or an expansion of a smaller hamlet or whatever, where does that all fall into this stuff? Like, is that still through an official plan amendment and that kind of thing? Like, I just think that we have to keep things, you know, as Councilor Mackey said, like, you know, our rural municipalities are unique to themselves and they're large. And I mean, for me to drive here to Owen Sound, it's an hour drive. Like, I mean, we live in a big area. So, you know, and it could be that tiny home type of development could be supporting agriculture and agricultural, you know, in the Thornbury area and the apple industry and stuff. So it just seems like it's getting rigid again, that, you know, it's pushing everything to the urban settings, which I understand to a certain degree, but there's certain uniqueness to the rural part that just, as Councilor, I'm feeling comfortable about it. But anyway, I'll leave it at that. I don't know if you have any comments there, but certainly I think, yeah.
Yeah, through you, Mr. Warden. Thanks for your question, Councilor McQueen. So a couple things in response. So if someone came in and wanted to apply for a tiny home development, if it's within one of our service settlement areas or even one of our privately serviced settlement areas, our villages or inland lakes and shoreline, you know, that wouldn't require any sort of amendment to the county official plan. If someone came in and they said, I've got an apple orchard or some other type of farm, and I want to put in 1 or 2 tiny homes for permanent or seasonal labor, that's another thing that could be currently contemplated under the county plan. If someone came in and said, I want to buy 50 acres of rural land and put in 75 tiny homes, currently today, that would require an amendment. And if these policies were to pass, it would still require an amendment. The big change here is though, well, one of the changes here, I shouldn't say the big change. One of the changes here is those dwelling units that are specifically associated with a resource-based recreational use. And so that's where the province has issued further guidance, and that's where we're trying to follow suit through our own county official plan. But there's already restrictions in the county plan on rural plans of subdivision or rural plans of condominium. That's not permitted as of right now, except for agriminiums. And so these policies would clarify that, and they would clarify that based on some of the proposals we've seen coming in and what have you. There's been some misinterpretations in my opinion of council's original intent on how broad that was meant to be applied. So we're trying to clarify some of that, but I just want to be clear that a number of those uses would already require an amendment today, and other uses would be permitted as of right, like those on-farm labor or an additional residential unit or development in our settlement areas.
Thank you, Scott. And with that, I think I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Now, it is 12:30, and I can see that Councillor Bordenreau is starting to fade there. And I want to give Scott the opportunity to give a report not before lunch, but after lunch. Unless somebody objects strenuously, I'm going to suggest we break for lunch. And we'll reconvene at, let's try for 1, but as soon as possible after 1. All right, we are recessed. Thank you, Rob. We'll bring the meeting back to order. CAO Wingrove had a family commitment that she needed to attend to, so she has left. So Randy has joined us at the front here. So we're back to the planning report regarding the provincial planning statement 2024 final version and transition considerations. Scott is going to lead us through that. Would someone care to move receipt of that report. Councillor Eccles and Councillor Body. Thank you. Scott, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Warden, and good afternoon again to members of council. So I feel like when we last heard about the provincial planning statement on report dated May 9th, we left you on a bit of a cliffhanger, what would make the cut, what wouldn't. And so this is the exciting conclusion, if you will, or at least I find it exciting. So hopefully you do too. So the province has been working on this and consulting on this for approximately the past 2 years. And Gray and member municipalities have submitted their feedback on 2 different drafts of the provincial planning statement. And what we have before us is the final version. And so that was announced by the province on August the 20th. And the efficacy date of the effective date of the provincial planning statement will be October 20th. And specifically in the current transition provisions, any decision made on or after October 20th will need to be consistent with this new provincial planning statement. So regardless of whether or not the planning application or policy matter was submitted a year ago, it has to meet the new tests of the provincial planning statement. Although it doesn't directly impact Grey County, this provincial planning statement also merges the provincial growth plan into it. So there used to be 2 separate documents, the provincial policy statement and the growth plan. Grey has always been outside of the growth plan, so that doesn't affect us to the same degree that it affects some of our neighbors and some of those municipalities further south of Grey. As I said, Grey and member municipalities have provided comments on the earlier drafts. The most recent draft was April 2024. There have been some changes made since then. The province has certainly listened to the feedback they've heard, and there's lots of good stuff in the provincial planning statement. There's still a few concerning policies on behalf of staff and some areas that are maybe a little ambiguous or that will seek some further guidance. The province has put out environmental registry posting seeking feedback specifically on certain transitional matters, and that's covered in the report, and we'll get to it in a few slides' time. And the minister has also noted that there'll be further training and additional guidance coming forward to support the provincial planning statement 2024 implementation. So certainly staff at the county and municipal levels will look to take advantage of those future training sessions or those future materials provided by the guidance to further inform our understanding of the way these policies are intended to be implemented. With respect to some of the changes, one of the most notable changes is a shift in how we forecast and allocate population and employment growth across the county. We talked about this a little bit about a month ago, and we talked about it just briefly at our Planning and Economic Development Advisory Committee, but it's now required that we use the Ontario population projections published by the Ministry of Finance. And on the one hand, there's some positivity to that in terms of if all municipalities are operating from the same playbook, then that saves room for regional variation or misinterpretation in that regard. That said, in comparing the Ministry of Finance's population numbers to our own county population numbers for that same period, they are quite radically different. So whereas the county was projecting 23,800 people up until the year 2046, the ministry is projecting almost 43,000 people for that same time period. So about a 19,000 person difference. And so on the one hand, it's positive that the province sees Grey as primed for growth and that we will be getting a share of that provincial growth. On the other hand, based on our own understanding of staff and talking to land economists, we wonder if some of these projections might be a little ambitious. And although it's one thing to put those numbers in your official plan, it's quite a different thing if those numbers find their way into your own municipal infrastructure and our county infrastructure planning, as well as our county development charges, background studies, and your own municipal development charges in that regard. If you're anticipating growth at a certain level and you base your development charges on that growth, and then that growth doesn't transpire, then you might be short on revenue to fund that infrastructure. Furthermore, we haven't seen the ministry's employment projections yet, so we don't know where those will land relative to our own county projections in that regard. This is something that we will be talking to staff at the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing on, and this is one of those areas that we are requesting further guidance on implementation from the province. And we've talked to some county colleagues from other counties across the province, and Grey is certainly not unique here. We are seeing a number of counties that had recent population projections that are now seeing projections and forecasts by the province that are significantly greater than what they came up with locally. There were some changes to the housing section of the provincial planning statement. We generally view those as positive. One of the earlier drafts of the document had some concerning changes, but the province heard a fair bit of feedback on that. And we believe that the policies going forward are supportable in that regard. One of the other big changes that you might hear about through different groups and in the media is the changes around what's called a comprehensive review. And that was a study that was first mandated by the 2005 provincial policy statement and has been in every version thereafter, which was essentially a study that a municipality or county would need to look at prior to creating a new settlement area, expanding an existing settlement area, or redesignating employment land, so your industrial parks, away from employment uses. The province has removed the requirement for a comprehensive review, and we believe this could have a negative impact on the county and our member municipalities insofar as it may be more difficult to keep our settlement area boundaries firm and really encourage redevelopment and intensification within those settlements, and that, you know, the spin-off effect here, and we certainly heard it from some of the farm groups, is that we could see further expansion into our agricultural and rural areas and our natural environment lands. So, you know, this is a change that, you know, the province has made the change and will work within the existing policy regime. But if we had the ability to give more input here, we probably wouldn't have rooted for this change, so to speak. With respect to the employment lands, not only is it weakening the resolve of maintaining those employment lands, there's also some new wording that would potentially allow for more incompatible uses in close proximity to employment lands. And certainly in talking to Savannah and Steve and our economic development team, as well as your own municipal economic development officers, the need for these employment lands is just becoming greater and greater. And we really need to prioritize protection of these lands, but also the expansion of our business parks and employment lands in that regard. Because, you know, especially once the baby boom moves through the system, that really is going to be what drives further growth. We've had a number of years where we're seeing high amounts of growth in Gray, and some of that is driven by retirees. But as that demographic bubble shifts through the system, it's that employment that's going to provide that draw for people locating in Gray, aside from our wonderful natural beauty. With respect to the rural and agricultural policy changes, we talked about some of the rural policy changes just before lunch there, with respect to the recreational dwellings not intended to be permanent residences. And as we talked about, we'll have to do some further digging there to really define and understand what that means. One of the positive changes in our mind is that the province has made it clear that additional residential units are now permitted on farms. So you could have a basement apartment, you could have a separate detached building. This is something that Gray has permitted for a number of years now, but it was ambiguous in the previous draft of the planning policy statement, and we had challenges over the years. So it's great that the province is making this clear in that regard. They're also clarifying some of the energy policies and allowing for certain renewable energy uses as part of an on-farm diversified use on farms. So this would mean that you couldn't take the whole farm and convert it to a solar field, so to speak, but you could take portions of the farm and consider them for energy generation in that regard. And then have also clarified the relationship between additional residential units and surplus farm dwelling severances, whereby farmers are buying additional farms for farm consolidation purposes and what those severances look like. The natural environment policies are largely very similar to the 2020 PPS, and they're supported by planning staff and our own planning ecologists. Some of the other changes, and this is noteworthy to a number of communities in Gray, are some of the servicing changes, and largely the province is still promoting municipal water, municipal sewer services as you know your go-to for new development. But in those areas, those smaller villages and hamlets and rural areas where you don't have municipal services, there is still the ability to have private wells and private septic systems. The change, however, applies to partially serviced settlements, and we have a number in Gray whereby you might have municipal water services, but you have private individual septic systems. The final provincial planning statement 2024 appears to be much more restrictive, whereby you have that scenario. But the reverse scenario, whereby you have municipal sewer but private individual wells, is still permissive. So there's a number of our secondary settlement areas, including places like Leith or Chatsworth or Walters Falls or other communities that are currently in that first boat, that we believe could see further restrictions on development under these provincial changes. It's something we're going to be reaching out to municipal affairs on and maybe their colleagues at the Ministry of the Environment to better understand the intent of these policies and how they would be interpreted, where we have existing settlement areas that are serviced in this manner. And then finally, there's additional implementation policies which further stress the need for early and often engagement with our Indigenous communities, which is supported by staff. There's a need for further collaboration with our school boards and our post-secondary institutions and other publicly funded institutions. Again, this is generally supported by staff. And when we talked about it at the Planning and Economic Development Advisory Committee, our representative from Georgian College, Dave, was very complimentary to the work that Savannah's team has done and other county departments have done with respect to coordinating with Georgian College and other institutions in that regard. So it's good to see these changes coming, and hopefully we can all be at the table as partners there as we plan for our growth, whether that be the physical water and sewer pipes or whether it be things like our hospitals and schools and other publicly funded institutions. And then further, there's still the need for upper tier municipalities to allocate housing and employment projections. So if we go back to that second slide where we talked about the Ministry of Finance projections, the Ministry of Finance gives us a number for Olive Gray. So for Olive Gray, based on the current ministry projections, we know that Gray is potentially going to grow by approximately 43,000 people. But it's still up to the county and county council to determine the location for that growth and how that growth will be distributed across our 9-member municipalities. We know that all 9 are growing, but as people around this horseshoe will know, they're not all growing at equal rates, and there's different types of growth in each of our municipalities. So that's something we'll need to dig further into in terms of those ministry projections. As I said at the beginning, the ministry or the ministry is seeking input on transitional matters related to specific planning matters that are already in process. So this could be an individual development application, or in the case of what we've chosen to highlight in this report, it could be municipal policy updates that are already underway. So in the case of the municipality of West Gray, Township of Georgian Bluffs, and the town of Blue Mountains, they've all been working on official plan updates for north of 2 years now. And that work all commenced prior to even the first draft of the provincial planning statement coming into play. A strong read of the transition provisions currently would say that should those councils adopt those new official plans or updated official plans, and should the county go on to approve those, they would need to be consistent with the new provincial planning statement, even if they're not in conformity to the county official plan. So we've asked that these 3 official plan updates be considered for a transition regulation in that regard, particularly even as it applies to that Ministry of Finance projection. If I'm a planner in Blue Mountains or West Gray, how do I know what share of growth will be allocated to that municipality until those discussions have happened between the county and member municipalities in that regard? So this is something with council, if council supports it, we'd like to feed back to the province on to say, yes, we support a lot of the provisions in the new provincial planning statement, but we do think there's a need for transition on these planning exercises that are all nearing a conclusion, and we don't want to have to hit the pause button and significantly expand the scope of those projects. As I said, there's a number of areas we're also seeking further clarification on, including the parcel servicing policies, some of the energy policies, and the Ministry of Finance projections in that regard. With respect to those ministry projections, we are recommending, and this was already a capital project that was identified in the 10-year capital forecast for 2025, that the county work to refine its growth management strategy to understand how those new ministry projections would impact the county, and then how they would be allocated back out to the 9-member municipalities. So this is something you'll hear more about through the proposed 2025 budget in this regard. So at this stage, the recommendation is that the report be received, that we will forward the report and comments onto the province through the environmental registry, and that we also share this report with the Planning and Economic Development Advisory Committee, our Agricultural Advisory Committee, and our member municipalities in Gray. And just based on some of the timelines, we are also asking that staff be authorized to proceed ahead of the minutes going through County Council on September 26th. That's all I have, but certainly happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Scott. Are there any questions? Councillor McQueen.
Thank you, Mr. Wardman. Thank you, Scott, for the report. Going back to the part you talked about additional ADUs on farms, it says ADUs, plural. So does that mean more than one ADU on farm parcels? Because usually we said one and we do allow one. I just, on that clarity, it says ADUs.
Through you, Mr. Warden, I'm just looking up the specific policy. I believe the way it's referenced, yeah. So you can permit up to 2 additional residential units, but this would be above and beyond any farm accommodation or farm labor accommodation needs too. So, you know, in our apple growing regions of the county, if you had existing bunkies or existing dwellings that service those seasonal staff that need to be brought in, that doesn't get factored into those 2 ADUs. So you could have up to two ADUs on a farm.
Thank you, Scott. Any other questions? Not seeing any, I'll call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you very much. The next report is regarding investigating a model for planning efficiencies and shared service delivery. Randy Schertzer will be presenting this report, but I have a mover to receive, please. Councillor Mackey and Councillor Carlton. Randy.
Thank you, Warden Milne. So on Thursday, August 8th, the 9 member municipalities and county council met in a joint meeting to discuss proposal for shared planning services to be potentially centralized at Grey County. Direction was provided to staff in the closed portion of the meeting to further investigate this potential model. A media release was issued on August 21st, which just noted that this potential model was being investigated. So the purpose of this report is just to formalize a request for feedback from the members municipalities and asking for that feedback by October 18th. Should committee support this motion today, correspondence will be sent to each municipality just asking for that feedback if it already hasn't been provided to date. So a municipal decision is not required at this stage, but rather the county is seeking just initial input in terms of whether or not this potential centralized servicing model could work. This feedback, as well as the feedback from local planners, developers, as well as others, will help inform the next report, which will come back to County Council before the end of the year. The report will also detail some of the financial matters, HR, IT, and transitional considerations regarding how a centralized planning service delivery model could be implemented. This follow-up staff report will be shared with both county and municipal councils. And it is at that stage that the county will be seeking formal direction on that model. So this proposal is being investigated to explore potential opportunities to enhance and improve the efficiency of planning services being provided throughout the county and member municipalities. It should note that local municipal decision-making authority regarding planning decisions would be unchanged by this potential planning service model. However, operational efficiencies would be expected at the administrative level. So the motion is that this report be received and that correspondence be sent to each member municipality requesting feedback on this potential model by October 18th.
Thank you, Randy. Any questions? Councillor Bourdignon. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, Warden Milne, through you, and thank you, Randy, for the report. I was just wondering, at what point would we have some more concrete structure of the plan to be able to share with the local council level?
Yeah, through you, Warden Milne. So we would have that at the next report that we could share with everyone at that stage. We're looking for feedback on obviously how the current model works and what improvements could be achieved potentially through this centralized planning service model. So and also looking at impacts or potential impacts in terms of hours that staff would be providing services directly to each municipality. So yeah, any and all feedback. There's a list that we've identified in the report, which just gives you kind of some indication as to the types of feedback that we're interested in looking for. But obviously any and all feedback at this stage is more than welcome. And that feedback will then be used to present what we think could be then a formal model that we think could work based on the feedback received.
And just a follow-up, Mr. Warden, if I may?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Through the warden. Thank you, Randy. And also in regards to the directors of planning that we have, I know at your very early stages, but the feedback from the council is one thing, but at what point will we be able to further engage the people that will be directly affected?
Great question, and through you, Mr. Warden. So we've already had some initial conversations with the local missile planners. And we're also seeking obviously further feedback and input through them, so that the direction from the initial discussions with them is to provide that feedback back to their each local municipal CAO. And then the CAOs are collecting that information both from staff, both from their councils, to be then provided back to county staff, which then we can incorporate into that final report.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Did I see another Councillor Mattress?
Thank you. Through you, the warden, and to follow along that vein as well. At what point in time has it already been, and will it be contemplated about rolling in the opportunities for public input as well? So what is the most opportune time when we'd be ready to be able to present something and then gather it up the way that we all do on our lower tiers?
Another excellent question. So we are working with our communications staff, and we'll be putting together a web page, just identifying opportunities for providing that feedback. So again, whether it's just members of the public that they're interested in providing some feedback, we'll be reaching out directly to some developers and others to try to obtain some direct feedback. But yes, we'll be trying to provide those channels and pushing that through obviously social media channels and others to try to get some feedback from the public if they're interested in providing that feedback. So we hope to have that up and running in the near future. I don't know if Scott or Rob have any further comments on that, but we're working on that as we speak.
Okay, thank you. Councillor DeBreen.
Thank you. Through you, Warden Milne. To Randy, with regard to the comment that CAOs are collecting feedback from their various staff, and the CAOs are going to collect the feedback from councils, at what point do you anticipate those CAOs sharing with council the feedback from staff?
So our hope is by providing all the feedback by October 18th, we can summarize all that feedback. And then the intent is to share that summarized feedback through that next report that would come back to county council and shared with each of the member municipalities. So that's the plan at this stage. And of course, we're happy to seek any further direction from council on that, but the plan would be to summarize all the feedback received from each of the local municipalities through their councils and staff, and then provide that, summarize that feedback and try to address that feedback and questions through the follow-up report.
Thank you. Thank you, Warden. Just to follow up then, so initially though, the feedback from councils will not benefit from the feedback from their own staff. That's going to come back in a report. Is that the plan, or is it up to the individual municipalities to decide if they want to understand both sides of the equation?
Through you, Mr. Warden, I say probably the best would be to leave that up to each individual municipality in terms of how to best collect that feedback. As mentioned, we've already had some initial conversations with the local planners, missile planners. And so we already received some initial feedback. And of course, we'll then be summarizing that and taking that in consideration in the next report. But any further feedback that we haven't heard to date, we've encouraged to go through their CAO. Again, through that process, the CAOs could decide if to share that as part of the conversations that they have with their local councils. But at the end of the day, all the information that's received, all the feedback we receive will be shared with both county council and the member municipalities.
Thank you. Any other questions? Call the question. All those in favor? That is carried. Thank you, Randy. Okay, we do have three matters to discuss in closed session. So I'll read the motion. The Committee of the Whole does now go into closed session pursuant to section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended to discuss: one, litigation or potential litigation, including matters before administrative tribunals, specifically an update on the appeal of Thornbury Acres. Two, labor relations and employee negotiations, specifically the Canada-wide early learning and childcare funding program. And three, a proposed or pending acquisition for or disposition of land, specifically regarding Patrol D land purchase. Someone care to move that, please? Councillor McKay and Councillor Nielsen. All those in favor? That is carried. So we'll just give Rob a moment and staff to do their appropriate stuff for the closed session. Thank you, Rob. Council has voted to return to open session, and I can confirm that we only discussed those items in closed session that were listed on the closed session agenda. Is there any other business come before this council today? Seeing none, any notice of motion? Seeing none. I have one further motion to adjourn. Councillor Dickert and Councillor Nielsen. All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Sorry, Peter, I didn't get you in on the adjournment there, but maybe next time.
Thanks, Mr. Warden.
You bet. Take care, guys.